The nanny was accused of mistreating the child, and the millionaire saw the pendant on her neck. It was the same one he gave to his daughter before she vanished with her mother 18 years ago. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Walker mansion, its golden rays barely warming the cold elegance that filled every corner of the Chicago estate. Chloe Davis moved quietly through the hallways, her soft footsteps echoing in the vastness as she made her way to the kitchen. At 18, she carried herself with a maturity that seemed too heavy for her young shoulders, her green eyes holding depths of sadness that spoke of a childhood cut short too soon. "Morning, Susan," Chloe whispered as she entered the kitchen, where the stern-faced housekeeper was already preparing breakfast with military precision. Susan Collins barely looked up from the elaborate spread she was arranging. "Miss Davis, Mr. Walker has already left for his morning run. Little Aubrey should be waking up soon." Her tone was crisp, professional, but Chloe had learned to read the subtle undertones that suggested Susan barely tolerated her presence. Chloe nodded, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the pristine silver pot. The routine was always the same. Thomas Walker would disappear into his world of real estate deals and private investigators, leaving his 6-year-old daughter in Chloe's care. It had been this way for the past 8 months. Ever since Madeline Walker had lost her battle with cancer, leaving behind a grieving widower and a traumatized little girl who desperately needed someone to fill the gaping hole in her world, that someone had become Chloe, though she'd never expected to find herself so deeply attached to the Walker family when she'd first answered the job posting. She'd been desperate then, 18, aging out of the system, with nothing but a high school diploma and a burning need to prove she could make something of herself. The position had seemed like a miracle. Live-in nanny for a wealthy family, good pay, and a chance to save money for college. What she hadn't expected was to fall completely in love with little Aubrey Walker. "Chloe!" The excited squeal echoed down the hallway, followed by the rapid patter of small feet on marble. Aubrey appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark hair a wild mess from sleep, clutching a worn stuffed elephant that never left her side. "Hey there, sunshine," Chloe said, opening her arms as Aubrey launched herself forward for their morning hug. "Sleep okay?" Aubrey nodded against her shoulder, but Chloe felt the slight tremor that had become too familiar lately. The little girl had been having nightmares again, something about monsters in the walls and shadows that moved when they shouldn't. Dr. Collins, the family pediatrician and Susan's brother, had assured them it was normal grief processing, but Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that something else was troubling the child. "Can we make pancakes?" Aubrey asked, pulling back to look at Chloe with hopeful brown eyes that reminded her so much of someone she couldn't quite place. "Of course we can, worse. But first, let's get you cleaned up and dressed. Your dad will want to see you before he leaves for work." As they headed upstairs, Chloe caught Susan watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was something calculating in the older woman's gaze, something that made Chloe's skin prickle with unease. But when Susan noticed her looking, her face immediately smoothed into its usual mask of professional indifference. The Walker mansion was a testament to wealth and loneliness. Despite its grandeur, the sweeping staircases, crystal chandeliers, and rooms that could house entire families, it felt hollow. Like a beautiful shell with its soul torn out, Chloe had grown up in group homes and foster care, places where warmth came from the people rather than the surroundings, and she recognized the difference immediately. Thomas Walker was a ghost in his own home. At 45, he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. His once handsome features marked by 13 years of relentless searching and unanswered questions. His daughter Lily had vanished when she was just 5 years old, taken by his ex-wife Morgan during a bitter custody battle that had ended in tragedy rather than resolution. Since then, Thomas had become obsessed with finding her, hiring private investigators, following false leads, and refusing to accept that she might be gone forever. Chloe had learned all this in pieces, from overheard phone calls, hushed conversations between Susan and Dr. Collins, and the way Thomas sometimes looked at her with an expression of painful recognition that made no sense. She'd asked Susan about it once, but the housekeeper had simply said that Mr. Walker saw his lost daughter in every young woman who reminded him of what Lily might have become. After getting Aubrey dressed in her school uniform, they made their way back downstairs just as Thomas was returning from his run. Even sweaty and disheveled, he commanded attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, with steel gray eyes that seemed to see everything and miss nothing. But when he looked at his younger daughter, Those eyes softened with a love so fierce it was almost painful to witness. "There's my princess," he said, scooping Aubrey into his arms despite his workout clothes. "Ready for another day of conquering kindergarten?" Aubrey giggled, the sound lifting some of the morning's melancholy. "Chloe's gonna make pancakes." "Is she now?" Thomas's gaze shifted to Chloe, and for a moment, she felt that familiar flutter of something she couldn't name. "Thank you, Chloe. I don't know what we'd do without you." It was a simple statement, but the gratitude in his voice was genuine. Chloe had become more than just hired help. She'd become part of their small, broken family, filling gaps she hadn't even known existed, as Thomas headed upstairs to shower. Chloe and Aubrey returned to the kitchen to make their pancakes. It was during these quiet moments, when it was just the two of them, that Aubrey seemed most like the carefree child she should be. She chattered about her friends at school, her favorite TV shows, and the new book they were reading together. But there were other moments too. Moments when Aubrey would go quiet and stare at nothing, or when she'd ask questions that seemed too mature for a 6-year-old. Questions like, "Do you think people can forget who they used to be?" Or, "What if someone you love had to go away but they didn't want to?" Chloe was flipping pancakes when she felt the familiar weight of the golden locket resting against her chest. It was her most precious possession, the only thing she had from her past, or at least the past she'd been told was hers. According to the social workers, it had belonged to her mother, who had died when Chloe was 5. The heart-shaped pendant was delicate, old-fashioned, and beautiful, though she'd never been able to open it to see if there was anything inside. Sometimes she caught Thomas looking at it with an expression that made her stomach clench with inexplicable anxiety. Once, she'd even seen his hand move toward it before he caught himself and turned away. She'd asked Susan about it, but the housekeeper had simply said that grief could make people see things that weren't there. "Chloe," Aubrey's small voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Do you ever feel like you've been somewhere before, even when you know you haven't?" The question was so unexpected, so close to her own constant feeling of déjà vu in this house, that Chloe nearly dropped the spatula. "What do you mean?" "Sweetie, sometimes when we're playing in the garden, or when we're reading in the library, I feel like I remember being there with someone else. Someone who isn't here anymore." Aubrey's voice was small, confused. "Is that weird?" Chloe knelt down to Aubrey's level, searching the little girl's face. "No, honey, that's not weird at all. Sometimes our hearts remember things our minds can't quite reach." It was a truth Chloe knew all too well. This house, these people, even the rhythm of their daily life. Everything felt hauntingly familiar, like a song she'd heard in a dream. She'd chalked it up to wishful thinking. A lonely girl's desire to belong somewhere so desperately that she'd convinced herself she did. But looking into Aubrey's trusting eyes, seeing the same confusion she felt reflected there, Chloe couldn't help but wonder if there was something more at play, something that connected them beyond their shared loss and need for family. The golden locket seemed to grow heavier against her chest as she served breakfast, its weight a constant reminder of all the questions she'd never been able to answer about her past. Questions that, unknown to her, were about to become devastatingly important 3 weeks after their conversation about memories. Chloe noticed the first bruise on Aubrey's arm. It was small, purplish, and hidden beneath the sleeve of her school uniform. Aubrey claimed she'd bumped into her desk at school, but something in the way she avoided eye contact made Chloe's stomach twist with unease. "Let me see, sweetheart," Chloe said gently. Rolling up the sleeve to examine the mark more closely, the bruise was finger-shaped, too precise to be from bumping into furniture. Aubrey pulled her arm away quickly. "It doesn't hurt anymore. Can we play now?" But Chloe couldn't shake the image from her mind that evening, as she helped Aubrey with her bath. She noticed the little girl flinch when the water touched certain spots on her ribs. When Chloe asked about it, Aubrey just shrugged and said she'd fallen during recess. "She's been clumsier lately," Susan observed when Chloe mentioned it. The housekeeper was folding laundry with her usual mechanical precision, not looking up from the crisp white sheets. "Children go through phases, mister. Walker was quite accident-prone at that age, too." Chloe wanted to believe it was that simple, but her instincts were screaming otherwise. She'd grown up in the system, had seen too many kids with similar explanations for mysterious injuries. The signs were there if you knew how to look for them. Over the next few days, Aubrey's behavior began to change in subtle but alarming ways. She became quieter during their usual chatter, more clingy when bedtime approached, and increasingly resistant to being alone with certain people. She would only eat if Chloe was sitting right next to her, and she started having accidents at night, something that hadn't happened since her mother's death. "I think we should call Dr. Collins," Chloe suggested to Thomas one evening, after Aubrey had gone to bed early, claiming her tummy hurt. Thomas looked up from the private investigator reports scattered across his desk, the same reports he pored over every night, searching for any trace of his lost Lily. "Is she sick?" "Not exactly sick, but..." Chloe hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "She's showing signs of regression. The nightmares are getting worse. She's having bathroom accidents. And there are these bruises." "Bruises." Thomas's full attention snapped to her, his steel gray eyes sharpening with concern. "What kind of bruises?" "Small ones, mostly on her arms and torso. She says she's been falling a lot. But Thomas..." Chloe took a deep breath. "I grew up around kids who were hurt. These don't look like playground accidents." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas's face went through a series of emotions: concern, confusion, and then something darker that made Chloe's chest tighten. "You think someone is hurting my daughter?" His voice was deadly quiet. "I think something is scaring her. Whether it's physical abuse or just emotional trauma, I can't say for sure. But she needs to see Dr. Collins soon." Thomas was already reaching for his phone. "I'll call Brian first thing in the morning." Dr. Brian Collins arrived at the mansion the next afternoon, his medical bag in hand and a gentle smile that immediately put Aubrey at ease. Chloe had always liked Thomas's family pediatrician. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a way of talking to children that made them feel safe. "Uncle Brian!" Aubrey squealed, running to hug him. It was the first genuine excitement Chloe had seen from her in weeks. "Hey there, little butterfly," Dr. Collins said, using his pet name for her. "Your dad tells me you've been having some tough days lately." The examination took place in Aubrey's bedroom, with Thomas pacing anxiously in the hallway while Chloe stayed to help keep Aubrey calm. Dr. Collins was thorough but gentle, checking each bruise and asking careful questions about how they'd happened. "This one here," he said, pointing to a mark on her upper arm. "This looks like it might be from a grip. Can you remember how this happened, sweetheart?" Aubrey's face scrunched up in concentration. I think someone grabbed me when I was trying to run away, but I don't remember who." Chloe and Dr. Collins exchanged a meaningful look over the child's head. Memory gaps were another red flag. "Run away from what, Doctor?" Collins asked gently. "The bad feeling," Aubrey whispered. "Sometimes I get a really bad feeling, like something scary is going to happen. So I try to run away, but someone always stops me." After the examination, Dr. Collins asked to speak with Thomas privately. Chloe waited downstairs with Aubrey, who seemed relieved that the appointment was over. They were building a fort out of couch cushions when raised voices drifted down from Thomas's study. Clear signs of emotional distress. "Impossible. Everyone in this house loves her. Pattern suggests someone she trusts." Chloe tried to focus on Aubrey's chatter about their pillow fort, but the conversation upstairs made her skin crawl. When Dr. Collins finally came downstairs, his expression was grave. "Chloe, could I speak with you for a moment?" They stepped into the kitchen, where Susan was preparing dinner with her usual efficiency. The housekeeper's movements seemed more rigid than usual, and Chloe noticed her hands trembling slightly as she chopped vegetables. "I've documented several bruises that are consistent with finger grips and restraint," Dr. Collins said quietly. "Combined with Aubrey's behavioral regression and memory gaps, I'm concerned about possible abuse." "Abuse!" Susan's knife clattered to the cutting board. "That's impossible. Who would hurt that sweet child?" Dr. Collins studied Susan's face carefully. "That's what we need to figure out. The bruises suggest someone with regular access to Aubrey, someone she trusts enough to get close to her." Chloe felt sick. The implications were clear. The abuser had to be someone in this house, someone who lived and worked closely with Aubrey every day. "I've recommended that Thomas contact Child Protective Services," Dr. Collins continued. "They'll want to interview everyone who has regular contact with Aubrey." "Of course," Chloe said immediately. "Whatever she needs?" Susan nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. We all want what's best for little Aubrey." But as Dr. Collins gathered his things and prepared to leave, Chloe caught Susan watching her with an expression that made her blood run cold. It was calculating, almost predatory, and completely at odds with the concern she'd just expressed. That night, after Aubrey had finally fallen asleep, only after Chloe promised to stay in the room, Chloe found herself walking the halls of the mansion. The grand house felt different in the darkness, oppressive, full of shadows that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. She was passing Thomas's study when she heard him on the phone with someone, his voice raw with emotion. 13 years searching for one daughter, and now someone is hurting the other one under my own roof. The pain in his voice was devastating. Chloe paused, her heart aching for this man who had already lost so much. I don't care what it costs, Blake. Find out who's doing this. Find out before they destroy what's left of my family. Blake? That had to be Blake Long, the private investigator Thomas had mentioned before. Chloe had never met him, but she knew he'd been searching for Lily Walker for years without success. A soft sound behind her made Chloe turn. Susan stood at the end of the hallway, perfectly still in her nightgown, watching Chloe with those cold, calculating eyes. Couldn't sleep? Susan asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Just checking on Aubrey, Chloe replied, though the little girl's room was in the opposite direction. Of course you were. Susan's smile was sharp in the dim light. You're such a devoted caregiver, Chloe. Some might say. Too devoted. The words hung in the air like a threat. Chloe felt the golden locket at her throat grow heavy, and for a moment, she could have sworn she saw recognition flicker in Susan's eyes as they fixed on the pendant. Good night, Susan, Chloe said firmly, not wanting to give the woman any more ammunition for whatever game she was playing. As she walked away, Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just walked into a trap she didn't even know existed. Something was very wrong in the Walker house, and somehow, she was about to become the center of it. Behind her, Susan remained in the shadows, her smile growing wider as she watched Chloe disappear around the corner. The knock on the front door came at exactly 9:30 on a Tuesday morning, sharp and authoritative. Chloe was in the kitchen helping Aubrey finish her cereal when she heard Susan's footsteps crossing the marble foyer, followed by the sound of hushed conversation. Chloe Davis, a woman's voice called out, professional but not unkind. Chloe's stomach dropped. She knew that tone. It was the same one social workers had used throughout her childhood, the careful neutrality that preceded life-changing news. She squeezed Aubrey's hand gently before walking to the foyer. The woman standing in the doorway was tall and slender, with auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun and a briefcase clutched in her manicured hands. Despite sharing the Walker name, Savannah Walker looked nothing like Thomas. She was all sharp angles and practiced smiles, the kind of person who'd learned to weaponize pleasantness. I'm Savannah Walker from Child Protective Services, she said, extending her hand. I believe Dr. Collins contacted you about my visit. Of course, Chloe replied, though her mouth felt dry. Please come in. Thomas appeared from his study, his face pale but determined. Savannah, thank you for coming so quickly. The irony of sharing a last name with the family wasn't lost on anyone. Savannah had explained during her initial phone call that she was a distant cousin who'd chosen to keep her maiden name professionally. It created an awkward dynamic, family investigating family, but Thomas had insisted he wanted someone who understood the stakes. I need to speak with everyone who has regular contact with Aubrey, Savannah said, settling into the living room with her notebook and recording device. Starting with you, Miss Davis, since you spend the most time with her. Chloe sat across from her, acutely aware of Susan hovering in the doorway under the pretense of dusting nearby furniture. Thomas positioned himself where he could see everyone, his protective instincts clearly on high alert. Tell me about your relationship with Aubrey, Savannah began. I love her like she's my own sister, Chloe said without hesitation. I've been caring for her since just after her mother passed away. She's been through so much trauma, and I just want to help her heal. And how would you describe her behavior recently? Concerning. She's been having nightmares, regression in her bathroom habits, becoming more clingy, and the bruises? Chloe's voice trailed off as she noticed Susan's sudden stillness. Yes, Dr. Collins documented several suspicious bruises. Do you have any idea how she might have gotten them? No, and that's what worries me. Aubrey claims they're from falling or bumping into things, but the patterns don't match those explanations. Savannah made notes, her pen scratching across the paper. Has Aubrey ever mentioned being afraid of anyone in particular? Chloe thought carefully. She gets nervous around certain people sometimes, but she's never named anyone specifically. It's more like she gets these bad feelings she talks about. What about you? Have you noticed anyone acting strangely around Aubrey? Before Chloe could answer, Susan stepped forward, her expression deeply troubled. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something I think you should know. Thomas frowned. Susan, the housekeeper wrung her hands, the picture of reluctant concern. I didn't want to say anything because I hoped I was wrong, but I've noticed some changes in Chloe's behavior lately. The room went dead silent. Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. What? You've been more agitated? Dear, short-tempered with Aubrey when you think no one's watching. And yesterday, I found this in your room. Susan pulled a small plastic bag from her pocket, containing broken pieces of what looked like Aubrey's favorite toy horse. That's not mine, Chloe said immediately, her voice rising. I would never break Aubrey's toys. Susan, what are you doing? I'm sorry, Chloe, but I have to think of Aubrey's safety. Susan's voice was thick with false regret. There's also this. She produced her phone and played an audio recording. Chloe's stomach lurched as she heard what sounded like her own voice, angry and threatening. Stop crying or I'll give you something to really cry about. You're just like your spoiled sister, thinking the world revolves around you. That's not me, Chloe whispered. But even to her own ears, the voice sounded eerily similar. I would never say those things to Aubrey, Thomas. You know I would never. Thomas's face was a mask of confusion and pain. The voice does sound like you, Chloe. Because someone's trying to frame me. Chloe turned to Savannah desperately. This is ridiculous. Why would I hurt a child I love? Why would I call for help if I was the one abusing her? Savannah's expression remained neutral, but Chloe could see the doubt creeping in. Sometimes perpetrators do report abuse to deflect suspicion from themselves. And you mentioned that Aubrey gets nervous around certain people. Have you considered that she might be referring to you? The accusation hit Chloe like a physical blow. No, that's impossible. Aubrey and I have a special bond. She trusts me completely. Trauma can be complex, Savannah continued. Children often maintain attachment to their abusers, especially when that person also provides comfort and care. This is insane, Chloe said, standing up abruptly. Susan, why are you doing this? What did I ever do to you? Susan's eyes filled with crocodile tears. I'm not doing anything, dear. I'm just reporting what I've observed. I wish I was wrong. Truly I do. There's more, Susan said quietly, producing another item from her pocket. I found this hidden under your mattress. It was a small digital recorder, the kind used for lectures or meetings. Savannah took it and pressed play. Aubrey's voice filled the room, small and frightened. Please don't hurt me again. I promise I'll be good. I won't tell anyone what you did. Chloe felt the world spinning around her. That's not real. Someone recorded Aubrey and spliced it together. This is all fabricated. But she could see the doubt growing in Thomas's eyes. The way he was looking at her like she was a stranger. Even worse, she could see him unconsciously moving to position himself between her and where Aubrey was presumably still finishing breakfast in the kitchen. I think we need to continue this conversation at the station, Savannah said, closing her notebook. Miss Davis, you're not under arrest, but I strongly recommend you come with me voluntarily for further questioning. This is a mistake, Chloe said, but her voice sounded weak even to herself. Thomas, please. You know me. You know I would never hurt Aubrey. Thomas's silence was deafening. His eyes kept darting to the evidence Susan had produced, then back to Chloe's face, as if he was trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with these horrible accusations. I need to think, he said finally. I need to process all of this. Of course you do, Susan said soothingly. This must be such a shock, poor little Aubrey. Thank goodness we discovered this before anything worse happened. As Savannah gathered her things and prepared to escort Chloe out, the young woman felt panic rising in her chest. Everything was happening too fast, spiraling out of control in a way that felt orchestrated, but by whom and why? Wait, she said suddenly, her hand going to the golden locket at her throat. It was an unconscious gesture, something she did when she was scared or confused. Can I at least say goodbye to Aubrey? She'll be frightened if I just disappear. I don't think that's wise, Savannah said gently. Given the allegations, please, Chloe begged, looking directly at Thomas. Just let me tell her I'm going away for a while so she doesn't blame herself. You know how she internalizes everything." Thomas stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes when his gaze landed on her locket. A sharp intake of breath, a moment of what looked like recognition followed immediately by confusion. 5 minutes, he said hoarsely. Supervised. As they walked toward the kitchen, Chloe caught Susan watching them with an expression of satisfaction that made her skin crawl. The housekeeper quickly arranged her features into a mask of concern, but for just a moment, Chloe had seen something else there, something that looked disturbingly like triumph. Whatever was happening, Susan Collins was at the center of it. But why? And how could Chloe prove her innocence when all the evidence seemed designed to paint her as a monster? The golden locket felt heavy against her chest as she prepared to say what might be her final goodbye to the little girl who had become the center of her world. The kitchen felt like a tomb, as Chloe entered with Thomas and Savannah flanking her like guards. Aubrey was still at the breakfast table, swinging her legs and humming softly to herself, blissfully unaware that her world was about to shatter again. "Hey, sunshine," Chloe said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the tremor in her hands. Aubrey looked up with those bright brown eyes, so trusting and innocent. "Chloe, I saved you some cereal. It's the kind with the marshmallows you like." The simple gesture nearly broke Chloe's heart. Even now, facing these impossible accusations, Aubrey was thinking of her, caring for her the way she'd been cared for. "That's so sweet of you, baby girl." Chloe knelt down beside Aubrey's chair, taking the small hands in hers. "Listen, I need to tell you something important. Are you going somewhere?" Aubrey's intuition was sharp, honed by too many losses for such a young child. "I have to go away for a little while," Chloe said carefully, aware that every word was being scrutinized by the adults watching them. "But I want you to know that I love you very much. And no matter what anyone says, that will never change." Aubrey's bottom lip began to tremble. "But why? Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. You're perfect exactly as you are." Chloe pulled the little girl into a fierce hug, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. "I need you to be brave for me, okay? And remember that sometimes adults make mistakes. But love is real, even when everything else feels confusing. I don't want you to go," Aubrey whispered against her shoulder. "Please don't leave me like Mommy did." The words shattered something inside Chloe's chest. "Oh, honey, this is different. I'm not going where your mommy went, and your daddy is going to take care of you. Will you come back?" Chloe met Thomas's eyes over Aubrey's head, seeing her own anguish reflected there. Whatever else was happening, she knew he loved his daughter desperately and was trying to do what he thought was best for her. "I hope so," Chloe said honestly. "I really, really hope so." As she started to pull away, Aubrey's small hand grabbed onto the golden locket at Chloe's throat. "Your pretty necklace is warm," she said with the randomness of a 6-year-old trying to process overwhelming emotions. "Miss Davis, we really need to go," Savannah said gently but firmly. Chloe nodded, standing up slowly. She was about to turn away when she caught Thomas staring at her throat with an expression of absolute shock. His face had gone white as parchment, and his hands were trembling visibly. "Thomas?" she said, concerned despite everything else. "Are you okay?" But Thomas wasn't looking at her face anymore. His eyes were fixed on the locket with laser intensity, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Suddenly, he stepped forward and reached out as if to touch the pendant, then caught himself and pulled back. "Where did you get that?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "The locket." Chloe's hand went protectively to her throat. "It was my mother's. The only thing I have left of her." "Your mother's." Thomas repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. Are you sure?" Savannah frowned. "Mr. Walker, is there a problem?" Thomas didn't answer. Instead, he moved closer, studying the locket with the intensity of a man seeing a ghost. Can I look at it more closely?" Something in his tone made Chloe's stomach lurch with inexplicable fear. "Why? Please." The single word held 13 years of anguish. With trembling fingers, Chloe lifted the locket over her head and handed it to him. The moment it left her skin, she felt strangely naked, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the accusations against her. Thomas held the delicate gold heart in his palm, like it was made of the most fragile glass. His fingers traced the intricate engravings on the surface, tiny flowers and scrollwork that spoke of old-world craftsmanship. Then, with movements that seemed almost reverent, he turned the locket over. The sound that escaped his throat was part sob, part gasp of recognition. There, etched in the tiniest script on the back of the locket, were the letters LWW, followed by Amor Eterno Papai. "Oh my God," he breathed. "Oh my God, it's real." "Thomas, what's wrong?" Susan had appeared in the doorway, her face creased with apparent concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," Thomas said, his voice hollow. He looked up at Chloe with eyes that held a mixture of hope, terror, and desperate confusion. "This locket. I had it made 13 years ago, for my daughter's 5th birthday." The kitchen went silent, except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Chloe felt the world tilt on its axis. "That's impossible," she said weakly. "This belonged to my mother. I've had it since I was 5 years old." "The inscription," Thomas said, holding it out so she could see. LW. Lily Walker. Eternal Love, Daddy in Portuguese. I had it engraved in Portuguese because Lily's mother spoke Portuguese to her when she was little. Savannah leaned forward to examine the locket, her professional composure cracking slightly. "Mr. Walker, are you suggesting that this young woman is your missing daughter?" "I don't know what I'm suggesting," Thomas said, running his hands through his hair. "This is impossible. Chloe has documentation proving she's from Albuquerque, that her parents died when she was 5. The timing doesn't match. The background doesn't match. Nothing matches except this locket," Chloe finished numbly. Susan had moved closer, her face pale. There must be some explanation. Maybe it's a similar piece, mass-produced jewelry. But Thomas was shaking his head. "No, I designed this myself. I worked with a jeweler for weeks to get it exactly right. The engravings, the specific shade of gold, even the way the clasp opens. Everything is unique. There's only one locket like this in the world." Aubrey, who had been watching this exchange with the wide-eyed confusion of a child, suddenly spoke up. "Chloe, your necklace looks like the one in Daddy's special box." All eyes turned to her. Thomas went very still. "What special box, sweetheart?" Savannah asked gently. "The one in Daddy's room, with the pictures of the other little girl who looks like me. He has jewelry and clothes and stuff in there." Aubrey looked between the adults with growing anxiety. "Did I say something wrong?" Thomas closed his eyes as if in pain. "She means Lily's memory box. I kept everything that might help me remember her when I found her again, including pictures of what the locket looked like," Chloe said slowly, pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to form in her mind. "This changes everything," Savannah said, her notebook forgotten. "If there's even a possibility that Miss Davis is Lily Walker, we need to halt this investigation immediately and contact the FBI. Missing children cases take precedence over." "No," Susan interrupted sharply, then seemed to catch herself. "I mean, surely we shouldn't jump to conclusions. One piece of jewelry doesn't prove anything. And what about the abuse allegations? Aubrey still has those bruises." But Thomas wasn't listening to Susan anymore. He was staring at Chloe with an expression of dawning wonder and terror. "Your eyes," he said quietly. "I kept thinking there was something familiar about your eyes. They're exactly like mine. And the way you hold your head when you're thinking, the way you bite your lip when you're nervous. Lily used to do those things." Chloe touched her face unconsciously. "I do that. Every day," Thomas breathed. "God, how did I not see it before?" "Because it's impossible," Susan said again, her voice higher now. "The girl has papers, Thomas, official documentation. You can't just decide she's Lily because of some jewelry. Papers can be forged," Savannah said grimly. "Identities can be fabricated. If someone wanted to hide a kidnapped child's real identity, then they'd give her new parents, a new background, and destroy any evidence of who she really was," Thomas finished. He was looking at Chloe like she was a miracle and a heartbreak all at once. Chloe felt like she was drowning in quicksand. Everything she thought she knew about herself was crumbling around her. "But I remember my childhood. I remember the foster homes, the group homes." "From what age?" Thomas asked gently. Chloe stopped, her mind racing. "I don't know. Everything before I was about 8 or 9 is pretty fuzzy. The social workers said it was normal, that trauma can affect memory. Or drugs can, Thomas said grimly. There are substances that can cause selective amnesia, especially in children. Mr. Walker, Savannah interrupted. I need to make some phone calls. This investigation is now officially suspended pending federal review, Miss Davis. You're no longer under suspicion for the abuse allegations, but you cannot leave the city until we sort this out. She can stay here, Thomas said immediately. Under house arrest if necessary. I'm not losing her again. The words hung in the air like a promise and a prayer. Chloe looked around the kitchen, at Aubrey's confused face, at Susan's barely concealed distress, at Thomas's desperate hope, and felt the golden locket burning against her palm where he'd placed it back in her hands. If what they suspected was true, then everything she'd believed about her life was a lie. But it would also mean she'd found something she'd never dared hope for. A family who had never stopped looking for her. The question was, who had stolen her identity and why? And what were they willing to do to keep the truth buried? The house felt different now. What had once been a sanctuary for Chloe had transformed into something both familiar and alien, like a half-remembered dream that kept slipping away just as she tried to grasp it. Thomas had insisted she stay in the guest room on the second floor while they waited for the FBI to arrive, but sleep was impossible. Every shadow seemed to hold secrets. Every creak of the old mansion whispered possibilities she wasn't ready to face. Dr. Stephanie Watson arrived the next morning with a kind smile and a leather briefcase full of psychological evaluation tools. She was younger than Chloe had expected for a forensic psychiatrist, with warm brown eyes and prematurely gray hair that she wore in a loose bun. I know this situation must feel overwhelming, Dr. Watson said as they settled into Thomas's study. We're going to take this slowly, and you can stop at any time if you feel uncomfortable. Chloe nodded, though her hands were trembling slightly. Thomas had wanted to stay for the session, but Dr. Watson had gently insisted on privacy. Sometimes memories emerge more freely without emotional pressure from loved ones, she'd explained, though the word loved ones had made Chloe's chest tighten with confusion. Let's start with what you do remember, Doctor, Watson said, pulling out a digital recorder. Tell me about your earliest clear memory. Chloe closed her eyes, trying to reach back through the fog that seemed to shroud her early childhood. I remember being in a car for a long time. I was scared and kept asking for my daddy, but the woman driving kept telling me that my daddy was gone, and I needed to be brave. How old do you think you were? Maybe 5 or 6? I was small enough that I couldn't see out the windows properly. Chloe's brow furrowed as she concentrated. The woman, she had blonde hair and she smelled like cigarettes and something sweet. Perfume, maybe, but it was too strong, like she was trying to cover up something bad. Dr. Watson made notes without commenting. What happened after the car ride? We went to a house that smelled like cats and old food. There was a man there who looked at me like I was a problem he didn't want to deal with. They called themselves Matthew and Rachel Davis, and they said they were my new parents because my real parents had died in an accident. Did you believe them? Chloe hesitated. I was 5. I didn't really have a choice but to believe them. But something always felt wrong. I kept having dreams about a big house with a garden, and a man with gray eyes who would sing to me in Spanish. Dr. Watson looked up sharply. Spanish? Sometimes Portuguese. Lullabies, I think. But the Davis family said I must have picked that up from TV or something, because my real parents only spoke English. Chloe's voice grew smaller. They got angry whenever I mentioned the dreams, so I learned to stop talking about them. That's very telling, Dr. Watson said gently. Authentic memories often persist despite attempts to suppress them. Can you remember any specific songs? Without thinking, Chloe began to hum a melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. The tune was haunting and beautiful, with a rhythm that spoke of lullabies and safety and unconditional love. Dr. Watson's pen stopped moving. Chloe, that's a traditional Portuguese lullaby called Estrela da Manhã, Morning Star. It's not commonly known outside of Portuguese-speaking families. But I don't speak Portuguese, Chloe protested, even as more fragments of the song seemed to bubble up from her subconscious. Language acquisition in early childhood is stored differently than conscious memory, Dr. Watson explained. It's possible to retain songs, phrases, even emotional associations with a language without remembering learning it. They continued for 2 hours. with Dr. Watson gently guiding Chloe through a series of memory exercises and psychological evaluations. Some sessions involved looking at photographs of the Walker mansion from different angles. Others used scent and sound associations to trigger potential memories. It was during one of these exercises that the breakthrough came. "I'm going to play some audio clips," Dr. Watson said, adjusting her equipment. "Just close your eyes and tell me what you feel, not what you think." The first few sounds were neutral. Birds chirping, cars passing, children playing. But then came the distinctive chime of grandfather clock, deep and resonant. Chloe's eyes snapped open, her heart racing. "That clock," she whispered. "I know that sound. Where do you know it from?" "Bedtime. Someone used to carry me upstairs when that clock chimed 8 o'clock. It was safe time, story time." Tears began streaming down Chloe's face without her realizing it. There was a book about a little girl and her doll. The doll wore a blue dress and had button eyes. Dr. Watson leaned forward. "Can you remember anything else about story time?" "The man. He had strong arms and he smelled like aftershave and something else. Something clean, like soap. He would sit in a big chair by the window and I would curl up next to him." Chloe's voice broke. "He called me his little star, his estrela pequena. My little star in Portuguese," Dr. Watson confirmed softly. "But that can't be real," Chloe said desperately. "The Davis family said my parents died when I was a baby. They said I lived with my grandmother until she died too, and that's when I went into foster care." "Chloe, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Dr. Watson said. "Based on your responses and the consistency of these recovered memories, I believe you may indeed be Lily Walker, the selective amnesia, the language retention, the specific sensory memories. They all point to a traumatic separation that was deliberately obscured." The room spun around Chloe. "But why? Why would someone do that to a child? There are many reasons people traffic children. Money, revenge, desperation. What matters now is that we're beginning to piece together what really happened to you." A soft knock on the door interrupted them. Thomas peered in, his face creased with worry. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Blake is here, my private investigator. He's been working Lily's case for years, and when I called him about the locket..." "Send him in," Dr. Watson said. "Multiple perspectives can be helpful." Blake long turned out to be a tall, weathered man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years of difficult investigations. He carried a thick file folder and a laptop bag. "Miss Davis," he said, settling into a chair across from her. "I've been looking for you for 13 years. The simple statement hit Chloe like a physical blow. "You've been looking for me specifically?" "For Lily Walker, yes. And the more I learn about your background, the more convinced I am that you and Lily are the same person." Blake opened his laptop and turned it toward her. "I've been investigating a network of identity fabricators who operated between Chicago and Albuquerque around the time of Lily's disappearance." The screen showed a complex web of connections, names, dates, locations, all linked by thin red lines that suggested a vast conspiracy. "This group specialized in creating new identities for children," Blake continued, "usually for parents trying to hide their kids from custody disputes, but sometimes for more sinister purposes they would take a child, alter their appearance slightly, create false documentation, and place them with families who believed they were legitimately adopting an orphaned child." "The Davis family didn't know?" Chloe asked. "Probably not. They likely thought they were helping a genuine orphan. The real crime was committed by whoever sold you to the network in the first place." Dr. Watson pulled out a photograph from her briefcase. "Chloe, I'd like you to look at this picture. It was taken from Thomas's memory box. Lily at her 4th birthday party." Chloe stared at the photograph of a little girl with dark hair and familiar brown eyes, laughing as she reached for a blue balloon. The child was wearing a white dress with small flowers embroidered on the collar. "I remember that dress," Chloe whispered. "It was itchy around the neck, but I loved the flowers because they looked like daisies." Thomas, who had been standing silently by the door, made a choked sound. "You complained about the collar all day. We had to put a soft ribbon underneath so you'd stop scratching. And there was cake," Chloe continued, the memory growing stronger. "Chocolate with strawberry frosting, but I got sick and threw up on Uncle Brian's shoes." Blake and Dr. Watson exchanged meaningful looks. These weren't details that could be guessed or fabricated. They were the intimate memories of a family celebration 13 years ago. "There's something else," Blake said quietly. "We've been monitoring some of the original network members who were never prosecuted yesterday. One of them made several phone calls to Chicago. Someone knows we're getting close to the truth." A chill ran down Chloe's spine. "What does that mean?" "It means," Thomas said grimly, "that whoever took you away from me 13 years ago might not be done with our family yet." As if summoned by his words, Aubrey appeared in the doorway, her small face troubled. "Daddy, why is everyone talking about the sad lady again?" "What sad lady, sweetheart?" Dr. Watson asked gently. "The one in the pictures with Chloe when she was little like me. Susan showed me the pictures and said the sad lady went away forever." Aubrey looked between the adults with confusion. But if Chloe is the same person as the little girl in the pictures, where did the sad lady go? The question hung in the air like a warning. Someone had been showing Aubrey photographs, preparing her for something. But who and why? And more importantly, what else were they planning? Blake's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard as the room fell into tense silence. Aubrey's innocent question about the sad lady had triggered something in the investigator's mind, and his expression grew increasingly grim as he scrolled through files and cross-referenced data. "Thomas, I need to see those photographs Susan showed Aubrey," Blake said, without looking up from his screen. "Right now. I don't know what pictures she's talking about," Thomas replied, confusion evident in his voice. "I keep all of Lily's photos in my private study. Susan shouldn't have access to them, Doctor." Watson gently guided Aubrey to a chair beside her. "Sweetheart, can you tell us more about these pictures? When did Susan show them to you?" "Yesterday, when everyone was busy talking about Chloe's pretty necklace. Susan said she wanted to show me something special in her room." Aubrey swung her legs nervously. "There were lots of pictures of the little girl who looks like me, but she was with a sad blonde lady instead of Daddy." Chloe felt ice forming in her veins. "A blonde lady?" "Uh-huh. Susan said the lady was the little girl's mommy, but she looked very sad and scary. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying a lot." Aubrey's voice dropped to a whisper. "Susan said sometimes mommies have to go away forever when they do bad things." Blake's head snapped up. "Thomas, we need to search Susan's room now." "I can't just—" "Yes, you can," Blake interrupted. "This is your house, your daughter's safety, and potentially evidence in a federal kidnapping case. Susan's privacy rights are secondary to Aubrey's protection." Thomas hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Dr. Watson, could you stay with the girls while we—" "I'm coming with you," Chloe said firmly. "If those pictures are of me, I have a right to see them." They found Susan in the laundry room, folding towels with mechanical precision. Her movements were too controlled, too deliberate, like someone fighting to maintain composure while their world crumbled around them. "Susan," Thomas said carefully, "we need to talk." The housekeeper looked up with practiced innocence. "Of course, mister." "Walker, is everything all right? Aubrey mentioned some photographs you showed her. Pictures of Lily with a blonde woman." Blake stepped forward, his investigator's instincts clearly on high alert. "We'd like to see them." Something flickered across Susan's face, just for a split second, before her mask of concern slipped back into place. "I'm afraid I don't know what little Aubrey is talking about. Perhaps she's confusing something she saw on television." "Susan," Thomas's voice carried a warning, "if you have photographs related to Lily's disappearance, I need to see them immediately. I would never keep anything from you regarding Lily." "Mr. Walker, you know how much I care about this family." Susan's hands were trembling almost imperceptibly as she continued folding. "Perhaps we should ask Dr. Watson if recovered memories can sometimes create false associations in children." Blake had heard enough. "Thomas, I'm calling this in. We need a search warrant and federal agents here within the hour." "That won't be necessary," Susan said quickly. I may have some old photographs in my personal effects. I'd forgotten about them completely. They're probably nothing important. Let's go look at them together," Thomas said, his voice deceptively calm. Susan's room was sparse and meticulously organized, with the kind of impersonal tidiness that spoke of someone who expected to leave at a moment's notice. But hidden in the back of her closet, behind winter coats and storage boxes, was a small metal filing cabinet with a combination lock. "I keep important documents secure," Susan explained, her fingers shaking as she worked the combination. Identity theft is such a problem these days. The cabinet contained 3 manila folders. The first held Susan's employment records and personal papers. The second contained financial documents and bank statements. But the third folder made everyone in the room go silent. It was filled with photographs of a young girl who was unmistakably Lily Walker, but not the Lily from Thomas's memory box. These photos showed her with a different woman entirely. A blonde, haggard-looking female with hollow eyes, and the unmistakable signs of drug addiction. "My God," Thomas breathed, picking up one of the photographs. "That's Morgan. Morgan during her worst period, right before she disappeared with Lily." Chloe studied the images with growing horror. The little girl in the photos was clearly terrified, clinging to the blonde woman not with love, but with the desperate attachment of a child who had no other choice. In several pictures, the woman was holding what appeared to be official documents. These were taken at some kind of clinic or office, Blake observed, pointing to the sterile background visible in several shots. "Look at the equipment in the corner. That's medical or laboratory grade." "Susan," Thomas turned to face the housekeeper, his voice deadly quiet. "How did you get these photographs?" Susan's composure finally cracked. I found them. Years ago, I was going to give them to you, but I thought they would just cause more pain." "Bullshit," Blake said bluntly. "These photos are evidence in a kidnapping case. No one just finds this kind of documentation and sits on it for 13 years. Chloe picked up one of the photos and felt the world tilt around her. The image showed her as a small child, sitting on an examination table while a man in a white coat held a syringe. The blonde woman, Morgan, was restraining her arms while she screamed. "I remember this," Chloe whispered. "The needle hurt and I kept asking for my daddy, but the sad lady said daddy wasn't coming back." "What else is in this cabinet?" "Susan," Blake demanded, but the housekeeper had gone completely white and was backing toward the door. I need to call Dr. Collins. This is too much stress for everyone involved." "You're not calling anyone," Thomas said, moving to block her exit. "Blake, what else do you see?" The investigator was already rifling through the remaining contents of the cabinet. Medical records from a clinic in Albuquerque, treatment logs for identity adjustment therapy. Jesus Christ, they were experimenting on children. "And look at this," Blake continued, pulling out a thick envelope. Bank records showing payments from an M. Walker to something called New Beginnings Family Services, $50,000 total, paid in installments over 6 months. Morgan paid to have Lily's identity changed, Thomas said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "She sold our daughter to cover her drug debts. But there's more," Blake said grimly. "These bank records show corresponding payments from New Beginnings to someone with the initials SC. Regular monthly deposits for the past 13 years. All eyes turned to Susan Collins. "Susan," Chloe said slowly, "you've been getting paid to keep quiet about what happened to me." "You don't understand," Susan said desperately. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Morgan was supposed to take Lily far away and never come back. The money was to ensure the family could move on, heal, find peace." "Peace." Thomas's voice was barely controlled rage. "You've watched me tear myself apart for 13 years searching for my daughter, and you knew where she was the entire time." "She wasn't Lily anymore," Susan burst out. "The treatment worked. She became Chloe Davis, a different child with different memories. Bringing back Lily would have destroyed the new life she'd built. That wasn't your choice to make," Blake said coldly. "And it doesn't explain why you've been actively working against their reunion now." Susan's face crumpled. "Because it's too late. Too much time has passed. Too many people know the truth now. And if it comes out..." She looked directly at Chloe with something that might have been regret. "If the full truth comes out, it won't just destroy you and Thomas. It will destroy everyone connected to what happened 13 years ago." "What full truth?" Chloe demanded. "What aren't you telling us? The clinic in Albuquerque wasn't just changing identities," Susan whispered. "They were part of something bigger, a network that moved children, altered them, placed them with families who never asked too many questions. And some of those children," she swallowed hard, "some of those children weren't kidnapped by their parents. They were taken by people who saw an opportunity to profit from desperation. Blake's laptop chimed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen and his face went ashen. "Thomas, we've got a problem. My contact at the Albuquerque PD just found the New Beginnings clinic. It burned down 3 days ago, the same day you found Chloe's locket." "Burned down how?" Thomas asked. "Arson, and they found a body in the basement, a woman matching Morgan Walker's description, but she'd been dead for weeks." The room went silent as the implications sank in. If Morgan had been dead for weeks, then who had been making the phone calls Blake's sources had intercepted? Who was working so hard to keep the truth buried? And most importantly, who else knew that Chloe Davis and Lily Walker were the same person? Susan's phone rang suddenly, the sound sharp and jarring in the tense silence. She glanced at the screen and her face went completely white. "Aren't you going to answer that?" Blake asked ominously. Susan's hand trembled as she declined the call, but Blake had already seen enough. "The caller ID said Dr. B. Collins," he announced. "Your brother, the family pediatrician who's been treating Aubrey for those mysterious bruises." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with devastating clarity. The abuse allegations, the planted evidence, the perfectly timed discovery of Chloe's true identity. It had all been orchestrated by the Collins siblings. But the question remained, were they trying to protect a 13-year-old secret? Or were they preparing to commit an even more desperate act to keep it buried forever? Blake's phone was already in his hand, fingers flying over the screen as he made urgent calls to federal contacts. The web of lies surrounding Lily's disappearance was unraveling at breakneck speed, and everyone in the room knew they were running out of time before someone tried to cut the remaining threads. "Don't move," Thomas told Susan firmly as her phone rang again. "Blake, how fast can we get federal agents here?" 2 hours minimum, Blake replied, ending his call. "But I've got local contacts who can be here in 20 minutes, Susan. I strongly suggest you start talking before this gets worse for you." Susan's facade had completely crumbled. She sat heavily on her bed, looking older than her 50 years, her hands shaking as she stared at the evidence scattered around them. "You don't understand what you're asking. If I tell you everything, people will die. People are already dying," Blake said grimly. "Starting with Morgan. How long has your brother been involved in this?" "Brian didn't want any part of it initially," Susan said quietly. "But when the clinic needed a medical professional to verify the children's health records for their new identities, they offered him more money than he'd ever seen." Chloe felt sick. "Dr. Collins examined me during the procedure. He made sure you weren't permanently damaged by the memory suppression drugs," Susan admitted. Unable to meet Chloe's eyes, Brian convinced himself he was protecting you, ensuring you'd be healthy in your new life. "Memory suppression drugs," Thomas repeated, his voice dangerous. "What exactly did they do to my daughter?" "Selective amnesia induction," Susan explained, the clinical terms rolling off her tongue like she'd rehearsed them. "Combined with minor physical alterations, temporary hair dye, strategic scarring to change identifying marks, dental work to alter bite patterns. The goal was to create a new child from the old one." Blake was photographing every document with his phone while Susan talked. "Who ran the operation? Who was in charge?" Dr. Marcus Hoffman was the lead researcher. He believed he was conducting revolutionary work in trauma therapy, helping children escape impossible situations by giving them fresh starts. Susan's laugh was bitter. He never questioned where the children came from or why their parents paid so much for his services. "And you?" Thomas's voice was barely controlled. "What was your role in destroying my family?" Susan was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was Dr. Hoffman's assistant before I came to work for your family. I helped develop the protocols, managed the documentation, ensured the new identities would hold up to scrutiny." The room went silent, except for the sound of Blake's camera clicking as he documented evidence. Chloe felt like she was drowning in revelations, each one more horrific than the last. "You knew who I was the moment I walked into this house," Chloe said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "You've been watching me, studying me, for 8 months. I was supposed to report back to Dr. Hoffman if you ever showed signs of memory recovery," Susan confirmed. "The drugs weren't 100% effective. Sometimes fragments would surface, especially in familiar environments. That's why you tried to frame me for abusing Aubrey, Thomas said, understanding flooding his face. You needed me to reject Chloe before I could recognize her. The plan was working until you saw the locket, Susan said miserably. Dr. Hoffman was sure no physical evidence had survived. But Morgan kept that pendant against all instructions. Blake looked up from his documentation. Where is Dr. Hoffman now? Dead 3 years ago, cancer. Susan's phone rang again, and this time Blake snatched it from her hands before she could react. Dr. B. Collins flashed on the screen. Blake answered, putting the call on speaker. Susan, what the hell is happening over there? Brian Collins' voice was tight with panic. I just got a call from Albuquerque. The clinic site is crawling with federal agents. Hello, Dr. Collins, Blake said pleasantly. This is Blake Long, private investigator. I think you and I need to have a conversation. The line went silent for a long moment then. Where's Susan? Right here, along with Thomas Walker and the young woman you helped transform from Lily Walker into Chloe Davis 13 years ago. Oh, God. The despair in Brian's voice was palpable. Susan, why didn't you warn me they were getting close? Because I'm tired, Brian, Susan said, tears streaming down her face. I'm tired of lying, tired of watching Thomas destroy himself searching for something I knew he'd never find, tired of pretending that what we did was justified. What we did saved that child's life. Brian's voice cracked through the speaker. Morgan was going to kill her. Susan, do you remember what she was like? The drugs, the violence, the complete breakdown. Morgan was going to kill Lily, Thomas demanded. Not intentionally, Brian said after a pause. But she was so deep into cocaine and heroin that she couldn't function. She'd leave Lily alone for days. Wouldn't feed her. Would bring dangerous people around when she showed up at the clinic with Lily, claiming she needed to disappear her daughter to protect her from you. Protect her from me. Thomas's voice was incredulous. Morgan convinced Dr. Hoffman that you were abusive, that you'd hurt Lily if you got custody. She had fake medical records, staged photographs, even coached Lily to be afraid of men with gray eyes. Brian's voice grew smaller. We thought we were saving her. Chloe found her voice. So you erased my memory and gave me to strangers. The Davis family were good people, Brian insisted. We vetted them carefully. They wanted a child desperately and couldn't afford the costs of legal adoption. They believed they were saving an orphan. Until they died when I was 12, and I went into the system anyway, Chloe said bitterly. Silence on the line. Then, they died. Car accident, drunk driver. Chloe's voice was steady, but Thomas could see her hands shaking. I spent the next 6 years in foster care and group homes, believing I was completely alone in the world while my real father was searching for me every single day. We didn't know, Brian whispered. Dr. Hoffman was supposed to monitor all the placements. But after he died, you and Susan kept taking monthly payments to stay quiet, Blake interjected. Even though you knew the system had failed and Lily was lost in foster care. We were in too deep by then, Susan said. If the truth came out, we'd face federal charges for kidnapping, conspiracy, medical malpractice. Brian would lose his license. I'd go to prison. And for what? Lily was already gone. I was never gone, Chloe said fiercely. I was right here, in this city, in this house, taking care of Thomas's other daughter while he grieved for me. I was here, and you could have reunited us at any time. Blake was studying something on his phone. There's more, Susan. I need you to look at this photo. He showed her the screen, and Susan's face went ashen. Where did you get that? Albuquerque PD crime scene. They found it in the clinic's fireproof safe. Blake turned the phone so everyone could see a photograph of Susan shaking hands with a well-dressed man outside the New Beginnings clinic. The timestamp says this was taken 6 months ago. That's well after Dr. Hoffman died. Thomas studied the image. Susan, who is that man? His name is Vincent Torres, she said reluctantly. He took over Dr. Hoffman's network after the doctor died. The monthly payments didn't stop with Hoffman. What network? Blake demanded. The child placement network never disbanded. It just went underground. Vincent has been running similar operations across the Southwest, moving children, changing identities, placing them with families who pay premium prices for problem-free adoptions. And he's been paying you to keep quiet about the Walker case because it could expose his entire operation, Blake concluded. Susan nodded miserably. When news broke about Lily's locket being found, Vincent panicked. He said if the Walker case got federal attention, investigators might trace the network back to dozens of other missing children. That's why the clinic burned down, Thomas realized. Torres is eliminating evidence. And Morgan? Chloe asked quietly. Vincent said she was trying to extort money from him, claiming she had evidence that could bring down the whole network, but I think... Susan swallowed hard. I think she wanted to confess. I think she was planning to tell you the truth about Lily. Blake's phone buzzed with an urgent text. His face went pale as he read it. We've got a problem, he announced. Vincent Torres flew into Chicago this morning. My contact at TSA flagged his arrival. Why is that a problem? Thomas asked. Because, Blake said grimly, Vincent Torres doesn't travel to clean up messes. He travels to eliminate witnesses, as if summoned by his words. The sound of car doors slamming echoed from the front of the mansion. Blake moved to the window and cursed under his breath. How many people know we're here? He asked. Just Dr. Watson and Aubrey downstairs, Thomas replied. Then we need to get them and get out of here now. Blake was already moving toward the door. Because there are 3 men in suits walking up your front steps, and I guarantee they're not federal agents. The past had finally caught up with them, and it was armed and dangerous. The doorbell rang once, then twice in quick succession. Too polite, too measured for men who had just driven across the country to eliminate witnesses. Blake motioned for everyone to stay quiet as he peered through Susan's bedroom window, studying the 3 figures on the front porch. Middle-aged Hispanic male, well-dressed, probably Torres, he whispered. 2 younger men, bulky jackets despite the warm weather, they're armed. Thomas's face had gone stone cold. The protective father overtaking the grieving man who'd just learned the truth about his daughter's disappearance. Susan, is there a back way out of the house? The servant's staircase leads to the kitchen, she said, her voice barely audible. But if they're professionals, they'll have someone watching the rear exits. The doorbell rang again. Followed by a polite knock, Blake held up his hand for silence as a man's voice called out, Mrs. Collins, this is Vincent Torres. I believe we have some urgent business to discuss. Dr. Watson and Aubrey are downstairs, Chloe whispered urgently. We can't leave them. We're not leaving anyone, Thomas said firmly. Blake, what are our options? Blake was already on his phone, typing rapidly. I've got backup coming, but they're still 15 minutes out. We need to buy time. The knocking stopped, replaced by the sound of something metallic against the front door. They're picking the lock, Blake observed. Susan, I need you to answer that door and act normal. Tell Torres that Thomas isn't home. He'll kill me the moment he realizes you know the truth, Susan protested. Not if you convince him that you're still in control of the situation, Blake said. Tell him the abuse allegations against Chloe are proceeding as planned, and that Thomas is at his lawyer's office dealing with the legal fallout. Thomas grabbed Susan's arm. If you do this, if you help us protect Aubrey and Chloe, I'll make sure the FBI knows you cooperated. It might not keep you out of prison, but it could save your life. Susan looked between them, decades of guilt and fear warring across her face. Finally, she nodded. What do I say about the photographs and documents? Nothing. Act like this is a routine check-in. Blake handed her a small device that looked like a hearing aid. This is a recording transmitter. Everything Torres says will be documented. The front door opened just as they finished the quick briefing. Susan straightened her shoulders and walked downstairs with the practiced composure of a woman who'd been lying professionally for 13 years. Blake positioned himself at the top of the stairs where he could hear the conversation while Thomas and Chloe crept toward the servants' staircase to check on Dr. Watson and Aubrey. Vincent. Susan's voice carried up from the foyer, artificially bright. What a surprise. I wasn't expecting you until next week. Plans changed, Susan. Torres had a pleasant tenor voice with just a hint of an accent. There have been some concerning developments in Albuquerque. I thought it would be wise to check on our Chicago interests personally. Everything here is proceeding exactly as we discussed, Susan replied smoothly. The nanny has been successfully discredited, and Mr. Walker is so focused on the abuse allegations that he hasn't had time to pursue any other distractions. Blake felt a grudging respect for Susan's acting ability. She sounded completely convincing, like a co-conspirator reporting progress rather than a woman whose world had just imploded. And the physical evidence? Torres asked. The locket and photographs. Contained and controlled. Mr. Walker was briefly concerned about the jewelry, but I assured him it was probably a coincidence. Mass-produced pieces, you know. There was a pause. Blake held his breath, knowing that Torres was studying Susan's face for any sign of deception. I'd like to see this locket for myself, Torres said finally. Of course, it's upstairs in my room with the other items we discussed. Footsteps started up the main staircase. Blake cursed silently and moved quickly toward the servants' stairs. But it was too late. Torres and his men were already on the second floor. Susan, Torres's voice had lost its pleasant tone. Why is there a strange car in the driveway? And whose laptop is this on your bed? The game was up. Blake stepped into the hallway with his hands visible but ready to move. Mr. Torres, I presume Blake Long, private investigator. I think we need to talk. One of Torres's men immediately reached inside his jacket. But Torres stopped him with a raised hand. He was studying Blake with the calculating gaze of a predator assessing a potential threat. Mr. Long, your reputation precedes you. 13 years searching for a missing child. That's quite an obsession. Torres smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I assume you found what you were looking for. I've found evidence of a criminal conspiracy that spans multiple states and involves dozens of missing children, Blake replied evenly, including Lily Walker, who's been living under a false identity for 13 years. Ah, yes, the Walker case. Such a tragedy. A mother's mental illness, a father's neglect, a child caught in the middle. Torres moved further into the hallway, his men flanking him. But thanks to our intervention, that child found a loving home and a chance at a normal life, until the Davis family died and she ended up in foster care, Chloe said, stepping out from the servants' staircase with Thomas beside her. Torres studied her face with professional interest. Miss Chloe Davis, I presume. Or should I say, Miss Lily Walker. You've grown into a beautiful young woman. Dr. Hoffman would be proud of his work. Dr. Hoffman is dead, Chloe said coldly, along with Morgan Walker, and who knows how many other people who got in your way. Morgan's death was unfortunate but necessary, Torres replied without a trace of remorse. She was going to expose an operation that has saved hundreds of children from impossible situations. Sometimes the greater good requires difficult choices. Thomas stepped protectively in front of Chloe. You stole my daughter and destroyed my family. There's nothing good about what you've done. I prevented a custody battle that would have destroyed a vulnerable child, Torres countered. Your ex-wife was convinced you were abusive. She had medical records, photographs, witness statements. All fabricated, Blake interjected. We found Morgan's payments to your network. She sold her own daughter to pay off drug debts. Torres's pleasant demeanor finally cracked. You have no idea what you're interfering with. The network I've built has helped thousands of children escape poverty, abuse, neglect. We've given them new lives, new families, new hope. You've trafficked children and destroyed families, Thomas said furiously. You turned my daughter into a commodity. I turned your daughter into a survivor, Torres shot back. And if you'd stayed out of it, she could have lived happily ever after as Chloe Davis, with no memory of the trauma that defined her early years. The sound of sirens in the distance made everyone freeze. Torres's expression darkened as he realized his window of opportunity was closing. Vincent, Susan said desperately. There's still time to contain this. The federal agents don't know about the network yet. We can say this was just about Morgan and the original kidnapping. No, Susan, there isn't time. Torres nodded to his men, who immediately drew their weapons. You've all become liabilities. Wait, Chloe said suddenly, stepping forward despite Thomas's attempt to hold her back. I want to know something first. The memories you suppressed. They're coming back. I remember the clinic, the drugs, the fear. But I also remember something else. Torres raised an eyebrow. What? I remember you being there, not just Dr. Hoffman and the medical staff. You held my hand during one of the procedures and told me everything would be okay. Chloe's voice was steady, but Blake could see the pain in her eyes. You convinced a terrified 5-year-old that her father didn't want her anymore. How do you live with that? For the first time, Torres looked genuinely uncomfortable. You were traumatized. The false memories of abandonment were necessary to help you accept your new identity. They weren't false memories, Chloe said quietly. They were lies. And because of those lies, I spent 13 years believing I was completely alone in the world, while my father never stopped looking for me. The sirens were getting closer. Torres raised his weapon, his decision made. "I'm sorry it has to end this way," he said, "but some secrets are too dangerous to survive." That's when Dr. Watson appeared at the top of the servants' staircase, carrying a terrified Aubrey in her arms. "Please," Dr. Watson said, her voice shaking. "Whatever this is about, don't hurt the children." Torres turned toward the new arrivals, and in that moment of distraction, everything changed. The moment Torres turned toward Dr. Watson and Aubrey, Blake lunged forward, tackling one of the gunmen while Thomas dove for the other. The hallway erupted into chaos as bodies collided and weapons clattered across the marble floor. "Get Aubrey out of here," Chloe shouted to Dr. Watson. But the psychiatrist was frozen in terror, clutching the 6-year-old who was screaming for her daddy. Torres recovered quickly from the surprise attack, raising his gun toward Thomas, who was grappling with the second gunman. But before he could fire, Susan Collins threw herself between them. "Vincent, stop! This has gone too far!" The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the enclosed hallway. Susan crumpled to the floor, blood spreading across her white blouse. But her sacrifice had given Blake the precious seconds he needed to disarm his opponent. Susan, Dr. Watson's medical training overrode her fear, as she set Aubrey down and rushed to the wounded housekeeper. Torres was backing toward the main staircase, his weapon trained on the group. "This is what happens when people interfere with forces beyond their understanding," he said coldly. 13 years of careful work, dozens of successful placements, all destroyed because one sentimental father couldn't let go. "You're insane," Thomas said, positioning himself protectively in front of Aubrey and Chloe. "These are children, not commodities." "These are damaged children who needed fresh starts," Torres replied. "Children from broken homes, abusive situations, drug-addicted parents. We gave them hope. You gave them trauma," Chloe said, her voice strong despite the chaos around them. "You stole their identities, their families, their right to heal and grow in their own lives." Blake was slowly moving closer to Torres. Using the conversation as cover, the sirens outside were getting louder. Help was almost there. "Lily," Aubrey said suddenly, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Your name is really Lily." Everyone turned to look at the 6-year-old, who was staring at Chloe with wide, understanding eyes. "I heard Daddy talking on the phone," Aubrey continued. "He said his other little girl was named Lily, and she had a pretty necklace just like yours." Torres's expression shifted as he realized the full implications of what the child was saying. "The younger daughter knows she's a witness." "No," Thomas said, moving to shield Aubrey completely. "She's a child. She doesn't understand what any of this means. She understands enough," Torres said, raising his weapon toward Aubrey. "I'm sorry, but..." The gunshot came from the servants' staircase. Torres spun and fell, his weapon skittering across the floor as he clutched his shoulder. Blake immediately kicked the gun away while Thomas scooped up Aubrey. Dr. Brian Collins emerged from the staircase, a smoking pistol in his trembling hands and tears streaming down his face. "I couldn't let you hurt that baby," he said to his sister, who was conscious but bleeding heavily. "Susan, I'm so sorry. I should have stopped this years ago." "Brian," Torres was staring at the pediatrician in disbelief. "You shot me. You were going to kill a 6-year-old child," Brian said, his voice breaking. "I became a doctor to help children, not to hurt them. What we did to Lily was bad enough. But this..." He gestured helplessly at the chaos around them. The front door burst open as federal agents swarmed into the mansion, their voices sharp and professional as they secured the scene. Blake immediately began briefing the lead agent, while Dr. Watson worked to stabilize Susan's wounds. "It's over," Thomas said softly, holding both his daughters as police and paramedics filled the hallway. "It's finally over." But Chloe was staring at Brian Collins with a mixture of recognition and dawning horror. "Dr. Collins, you were there, at the clinic. You examined me after each procedure." Brian couldn't meet her eyes. "I told myself I was protecting you, making sure the treatments weren't causing permanent damage." "The treatments," Chloe repeated slowly. "The memory suppression, the identity alteration." But there was something else, wasn't there? Something you haven't told us about yet. Brian looked at his wounded sister, then at Torres, who was being handcuffed by federal agents, then finally at Chloe. There were side effects we didn't anticipate. The memory drugs, combined with the trauma of separation. Some of the children developed enhanced emotional connections to their new environments. What does that mean? Thomas demanded. It means, Dr. Watson said quietly, looking up from treating Susan, that Lily's attachment to this family might be partially artificial. The drugs could have made her more susceptible to forming intense bonds as a survival mechanism. Chloe felt the world spinning around her. Are you saying my feelings for Thomas and Aubrey aren't real? No, Brian said quickly. Your capacity for love is absolutely real, but the drugs might have amplified your need to belong, to attach, to find family. It's why you bonded so strongly with the Davis family initially, and why you felt such a powerful connection to the Walkers. That doesn't make her love any less valid, Dr. Watson said firmly. Enhanced emotional capacity doesn't diminish authentic feelings. Torres laughed bitterly from where he sat handcuffed. Do you see, even now, you're questioning whether your own emotions are genuine? That's what happens when you dig up the past. Some things are better left buried. No, Chloe said, her voice growing stronger. The only thing I'm questioning is whether I can forgive myself for not fighting harder to remember sooner. She knelt down beside Susan, who was conscious but pale. Susan, why did you really try to frame me? It wasn't just about protecting the network, was it? Susan's breathing was labored, but her eyes were clear. You want the truth, the real truth. Please. I watched Thomas destroy himself searching for you. 13 years of private investigators, false leads, broken hopes. I watched him waste away while I knew exactly where you were. Susan coughed, wincing at the pain. When you showed up here as his employee, it felt like cosmic justice. He was so close to what he wanted most, but still blind to it. That's not why you tried to frame me, Chloe pressed. Susan was quiet for a long moment. I didn't want him to find you because I was afraid of what would happen when he did. What do you mean? I was afraid he'd be disappointed. The real Lily was a sweet, innocent 5-year-old. But you'd been through foster care, abandonment, trauma. You'd become someone harder, more suspicious, more damaged. Susan's voice dropped to a whisper. I thought if he found out who you really were, he'd reject you all over again. Thomas knelt down beside them. Susan, I could never reject my daughter. Not the 5-year-old she was, not the 18-year-old she's become, not any version of her, even if she's not exactly who you remember, Susan asked. She's exactly who she was meant to become, Thomas said firmly. Lily was my little girl. Chloe is my daughter. They're the same person, shaped by different experiences, but absolutely perfect exactly as she is. Chloe felt tears running down her face. But what if I can't be both? What if I can't be Lily for you and Chloe for myself? Then be whoever you want to be, Thomas said, taking her hands. I don't need you to be the 5-year-old I lost. I need you to be the 18-year-old I found. As the paramedics prepared to transport Susan and Torres to the hospital, Blake approached with news. The FBI has Torres's phone records. They've identified at least 30 other children who were processed through his network over the past decade. This case is going to help reunite dozens of families. Dr. Watson was documenting the scene for her report when Aubrey tugged on her sleeve. Dr. Watson, is Chloe really my sister? Yes, sweetheart. She's your big sister who got lost for a long time. But she's home now. Aubrey considered this seriously, then walked over to Chloe. I'm glad you came home, she said simply. And I'm glad you saved me from the bad people. Chloe hugged her little sister tightly. I'll always protect you, Aubrey. That's what big sisters do. As the chaos of the investigation continued around them, the 3 Walkers sat together on the stairs. A father who had never stopped searching, a daughter who had never stopped hoping, and a little girl who had brought them together. The past had finally released its grip on them. Now they could begin building their future. 6 months later, Chloe Davis Walker stood in the garden of the Walker mansion, watching Aubrey chase butterflies between the rose bushes. The morning sun cast everything in golden light, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely at peace with who she was. The legal proceedings had been lengthy but straightforward. Vincent Torres pled guilty to federal charges of human trafficking, conspiracy, and murder in exchange for providing information about his network. His cooperation led to the rescue of 17 other children and the reunification of 12 families across the Southwest. Dr. Brian Collins received a reduced sentence for his cooperation. Though he'd lost his medical license permanently, he now worked at a nonprofit clinic for at-risk youth. Trying to atone for his past mistakes, Susan Collins had survived her gunshot wound and was serving a 7-year sentence for her role in the conspiracy. But her testimony had been crucial in dismantling the trafficking network. "Penny, for your thoughts." Thomas appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the relaxed smile that had become more frequent as their family healed together. "Just thinking about how different everything is now," Chloe said, accepting the warm mug gratefully. "6 months ago, I thought I was completely alone in the world. And now I have a father who sings Portuguese lullabies when he thinks no one is listening, and a little sister who insists on braiding my hair every morning." Chloe smiled at Aubrey, who had abandoned butterfly hunting in favor of building a fairy house from twigs and flower petals. "I have a family." Thomas studied her face carefully. No regrets about choosing to keep the name Chloe. It had been one of the hardest decisions of her life, after extensive therapy with Dr. Watson. Chloe had realized that both identities were equally real and valid parts of who she was. Lily Walker was the beloved daughter who had been stolen. Chloe Davis was the survivor who had endured and thrived despite impossible circumstances. "Lily is who I was born to be," she said thoughtfully. "But Chloe is who I became through surviving everything that happened to me. I need both parts to be whole." "Chloe Davis Walker," Thomas said, testing the hyphenated name they'd settled on. "It suits you." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Aubrey's industrious fairy house construction. The little girl had adjusted to the truth about her sister with the resilience of childhood, though she still occasionally asked questions that broke their hearts with their innocence. "Dad?" Chloe still sometimes stumbled over the word. 13 years of absence making intimacy feel both natural and foreign. "There's something I need to tell you." Thomas's attention sharpened immediately. "What is it?" "I've been meeting with Morgan." The coffee mug slipped from Thomas's hand, shattering on the stone path. "What?" "Blake found her 3 weeks ago. She's not dead. That was another woman, someone Torres killed to make us think Morgan was gone." Chloe took a deep breath. "She's been in a rehabilitation facility in San Diego for the past 2 years. Clean, sober, and eaten alive by guilt over what she did." Thomas's face cycled through shock, anger, and something that might have been hope. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to see her myself first. I needed to understand why she made the choices she did before I could decide whether to hate her or forgive her." "And what did you decide?" Chloe was quiet for a long moment, watching Aubrey place the last twig on her fairy house with the concentration of an architect. "I decided that hate is too heavy to carry around. Morgan was sick, addicted, desperate, convinced she was protecting me from a father she'd been manipulated into believing was dangerous. The fake evidence Torres mentioned. She showed me copies of everything. Medical records claiming you'd broken my arm, photographs that looked like bruises but were actually makeup, even a recording of someone imitating your voice-making threats." Chloe's voice was steady, but Thomas could see the pain in her eyes. She genuinely believed she was saving me. "That doesn't excuse what she did." "No, it doesn't, but it explains it." Chloe turned to face him fully. "She wants to see you, Thomas. She wants to apologize and try to make amends for the 13 years she stole from us." Thomas was quiet for so long that Aubrey noticed and came running over. "Daddy, are you sad?" "Just thinking." "Princess," he said, lifting her into his arms. "Chloe was telling me about someone from long ago who wants to say sorry for hurting our family." Aubrey considered this with 6-year-old wisdom. "Mommy used to say that everyone deserves a chance to say sorry, even when they do really bad things." "Your mommy was very wise," Chloe said softly. Madeline Walker had been gone for 2 years, but her influence on the family remained strong and positive. "I don't know if I'm ready to see Morgan," Thomas admitted. "After everything she put us through." "You don't have to be ready today," Chloe said, "but maybe someday for closure if nothing else." Blake appeared on the garden path, carrying a thick manila folder and wearing the satisfied expression of an investigator who'd successfully closed a long-running case. "Good news and great news," he announced, joining their family circle. "Which do you want first?" "Great news." Aubrey declared immediately. The great news is that the Walker Foundation has successfully reunited its 15th family this month. A little boy named Miguel was returned to his grandparents in Arizona yesterday. The Walker Foundation had been Thomas's idea, a non-profit organization dedicated to finding missing children and supporting families torn apart by trafficking. It was funded by the Walker family fortune and staffed by former victims. Law enforcement professionals and volunteers who understood the unique pain of family separation. And the good news? Chloe asked. The good news is that Torres's appeal was denied. He's going to spend the rest of his life in federal prison, and his network is completely dismantled. Thomas nodded grimly. Any word on the other missing children? 23 recovered so far, with leads on 6 more. Dr. Watson's memory recovery techniques have been crucial in helping the older kids piece together their original identities. Dr. Stephanie Watson had become more than just their family therapist. She'd developed groundbreaking protocols for helping trafficking victims recover suppressed memories and had testified before Congress about the psychological impact of identity theft on children. Speaking of Dr. Watson, Blake continued, she wanted me to remind you about your session tomorrow, Chloe. She thinks you're ready to try recovering some of the earlier memories from before the kidnapping. Chloe nodded, though the prospect still made her nervous. The recovered memories from the clinic had been traumatic enough. She wasn't sure she was ready to relive the actual moment of separation from her father. We'll take it one step at a time, Thomas said, reading her expression. And if it becomes too painful, we stop. You've already remembered enough to know who you are. I want to remember the good parts too, Chloe said quietly. I want to remember what it felt like to be completely safe and loved before everything went wrong. You're completely safe and loved now, Aubrey announced matter-of-factly. And I'll make sure nobody takes you away again. The fierce protectiveness in her little sister's voice made Chloe laugh, despite the emotional weight of the conversation. Thank you, Aubrey. I'll make sure nobody takes you away either. As the sun climbed higher and the garden filled with the sounds of a typical Saturday morning, Chloe found herself thinking about the golden locket that had started everything. It now sat in a place of honor on her dresser, next to photographs of both her families, the Walkers she'd been born to, and the Davis family who'd loved her despite the circumstances of her arrival. She was no longer the lost little girl who'd been stolen from her father's arms, nor was she simply the abandoned foster child who'd learned to survive on her own. She was both, and neither. She was Chloe Davis Walker, daughter and sister and survivor, shaped by loss but defined by love. The past would always be part of her story, but it no longer controlled her future. She had a father who had never stopped searching, a sister who adored her unconditionally, and a family that had been broken but never destroyed. Some bonds, she'd learned, were stronger than trauma, deeper than memory, and more enduring than time itself. Love like that didn't disappear just because someone tried to erase it. It waited patiently in the heart until the moment was right to bloom again. As Aubrey dragged her toward the ferry house to admire the finishing touches, and Thomas followed with the warm smile that meant home, Chloe knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. She was home.